Hi guys, I hope you're doing well. Hope you can see me, and I hope you can hear me. Let me know if you can hear me actually, so I know that I'm speaking to some people. I always get I've got a bit of a dodgy mic. Oh, I can hear myself now, so that's good. I can hear myself. And why can I hear myself? I'm gonna switch that off. Brilliant. Okay, wonderful. Uh, Excellent. Okay, so I hope you guys are doing well. I know I called this session at quite short notice. I think I sent it out a few days ago. Well, I put it up on YouTube a couple of days ago, or yesterday maybe, and I sent out a message. So I'm not expecting large numbers of people to turn up today, but that's fine. You can always watch the recording later. So the idea behind today is just to answer your questions, but more particularly, I think what you're here for is you're here for some views about the next paper, and paper 2 in particular for Edexcel. Unfortunately, this is not going to very much apply to AQA because AQA has a different paper for paper 2, but this is really very much for paper 1. But I suspect most of you, at least those of you who attended my last session, would have been fairly pleased. Is that fair to say? Fairly pleased with the last session, with the last paper. Ella saying you saved my life on paper 1. That's good. I like to put that up on my screen. Fantastic. I'll put that as my strapline on my book. You saved my life on paper 1. In fact, I have got on my book, I put a strapline. What did I put up? Literally the only reason I got an A star, Jane, year 13 student. And then I had a few more on the back of this. Anyway, yeah. At least Angel gave. Thank you very much, Abdullah. Okay, some of you haven't touched paper 2 content yet. Fair enough. You got time. You got time. It's early days, maybe. Paper 1 was lovely. Thank you. That's wonderful. Celeste, I think it is. That's really good to hear. Yeah, 5 paragraphs isn't a problem for an extended essay, for a 30-mark essay. Just don't worry too much about that. Liberalism question you revised for properly, fine. That's you got away with it. Yeah. Amna, you mentioned a paragraph on Palestine. I think that's fine, and how Corbyn and Starmer differed. Yeah, that's good, isn't it? That's internal differences, right? Because the question was about internal, like a difference between a party and its past, and you could look at the Conservative and the Labour, and of course there was that Lib Dem thing, but you didn't quite have to look at Lib Dems, I have to say, but you could do, because there were other things in the source, I believe, that you could have used. But yeah, that's perfectly fine because it opens up the opportunity to talk about that, doesn't it? So I think that's perfectly fine. Yeah. Yeah, some of you didn't quite like paper 1. Fair enough. I'm just going through your questions before I move on. As I'm waiting for others. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to go through some questions. So I'm going to look through my potential predicted questions. Now, it may be that you find some of these questions difficult. I hope you don't, but if you find these questions difficult, you can. So on Monday, Bank Holiday Monday, I've got a whole day webinar. So that's from 10 a.m. To around 3:34. Depending on how quickly you finish. And I will be going through answers to these questions. I normally do it at King's College, but I think because you guys are in deep revision, it probably makes much more sense just to do it online. And I think a lot of people did say they wouldn't turn up, but they would do it online. So yeah, this is on Monday. I'm not saying you have to attend this, but it's a whole day's revision. Yeah, it is, I'm afraid, Dan. So what I did, I mean, I think since March, we've been working through video webinars. So series 3 and 4, and so many students joined us during those series 3 and 4. I think some of you may have joined me. I went through a great number of questions. I'm not going to be able to go through those answers today, I'm afraid. But what I can do is alert you to the questions that I think you should be thinking about. Great. Ahmed says, I got an A star last year. Listen to the goat. And I think I'm not a goat. I prefer to be called a lion myself. I think goats are feeble creatures. Mohammed, Mr. Patel is so committed to helping us. Yes, I hope I am. I do want you guys to do well. And all I ask for return is for you to subscribe to my YouTube channel. That's all I ask. Last year, last year I started off with around, I think it was around 100 subscribers. Then I started doing these webinars, and it sort of grew and grew. And now we're on something a little bit bigger, which is great. Jade, I know what goat means. I'm just joking. Thank you, Jade, for explaining my joke to me. All right, shall we move on? Because I think you guys are bored with this initial chatter. Let's get on with things, I suspect. Zoha's asking a question. Well, actually, it's a good question. Is it enough to just go off your book? Yes, I think that's enough. I don't think if you've got my book and you're committed to going through those plans and you're committed to Googling and working out, I don't think you need to attend I'm not saying attend my session. I'm saying those people who should attend my session are those who really do want to get, like, who feel they can't do that. They need some additional help. That's all I'm saying here, rather than everyone should attend it. So with that Monday session, if you decide that my book is sufficient. So for those of you who don't know, I've got a book on Amazon, and it just goes through, apart from questions, it goes through lots and lots of plans. And some students find that easy. You can just work through the plans, and fair enough. It just works pretty well. So you're welcome to do that. Yes. Now, why can only subscribers use this chat? Well, so this is my sneaky way of trying to get more subscribers. Is that a sneaky thing to do? Should I be taking that off? I may be making an American book, Holly, but not this year, I'm afraid. I don't. I think I'm probably not going to do that this year. I just don't have the time this year. And elections are coming up, and I'm so busy. I've got things to do. I've got elections to run. Okay. I am planning to do a global politics prediction. I am, yes. Right. So I feel we should begin. Otherwise, we will. Yeah, actually, Dan's got a good question. So I'm going to alert you to this question. So I'm just answering some basic questions at present, only because there are some good ones. So Dan's question is, should we be revising paper 2 and 3 simultaneously within these weeks? I think probably so. Yeah, probably so. I think probably in this next week, majority of it probably should be paper 2, not majority, but maybe 60%, 70% paper 2. And then move on to, or you do some paper 3. I would suggest that's probably the best way to do it. I'm probably going to do before, like I did last week, I'm probably going to do another more sort of like Q&A session before your paper 2 exam, just so that you can work through that, or you can get some additional tips and helps. But yeah, I'm not going to answer lots and lots of specific questions today, probably. Yeah, I don't have a paper. I don't have a US book. I think I mentioned that. And good. And the best way to revise is always to write essays. That's just a standard essay. That's the standard technique for all revision. I would suggest. So always write essays and essay plans. But you've got to focus on essay and essay plans, I have to say, and not worry about doing lots and lots of specific things. Right. So that's going on Tuesday, on Monday, not Tuesday, on Monday. And if you're interested in signing up to that, you're welcome to do so. And I'll put that back up later. So we're going to start with Constitution. We're going to start with Constitution, and I shall give you, yeah. So yeah, the revision day answers all the questions that I'm going to show you about today, and a little bit more, I think. DB, that's right. Okay. Mohammed, I was watching a HODA seminar where a team leader for Edexcel said that nailing exam structure is very important. The team leader also said contemporary examples are the best way they differentiate. Fine. Yeah, I wouldn't say no to that. I think that's a fairly good thing to do. So we've got Nora. Nora's with us. And hi Nora, can you hear us?
Hello.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nora, for joining us. So Nora is going to ask your questions to me now. So I no longer have to, what's the word? I no longer have to think about the screen. I can just go on and talk. And Nora, from time to time, you're welcome to just butt in and tell me how things are. And don't ask Nora about her exam. And it's me. It's about me today, not about Nora.
Jade,
Let's
it
try
went
to.
well, thank you. How did your exam go?
Thank you, Nora. Um, uh, Nora did it with. Did you finish your exam with your eyes closed? I want to move this ever so slightly. Let me see if I can move this around. Oh, okay. Here we go. That's good. Oh, maybe it didn't move. Give me a second. I may have done something here, which I. Great. Okay, that's better because then it stays out of the way, I think. Oh, we can do it there. Yeah, that's good. All right. Let's move on. So, if we've got any more questions, Nora is the person to ask, and I will be happy to be interrupted from time to time. Let's go through my questions. Constitution. So here are the past questions that have come up in Constitution. So there was a question on devolution. Devolution is in danger of undermining the unity of the UK. There was this question about the UK constitution requires major change. So it's like future. What should be changed in the constitution? What should be adapted in the constitution? Again, there was a question here, which is a bit odd, that devolution has not been good for Wales and Scotland, but not good, sorry, for England and Northern Ireland. Good for Wales and Scotland, not good for England and Northern Ireland. Yeah, which is, a bit rubbish, really. But anyway, there's a question on devolution. There was another question on devolution. Evaluate the view that devolution has created more problems than it has solved. So we've had 3 devolution questions so far. There was a question last year, which we actually predicted pretty well, I have to say, and is evaluate the view that the UK now needs an entrenched and codified constitution, right? So if we look at the specification on the constitution, they've asked questions, as I said, about the future, further reform to the constitution. They've asked a question about the entrenchment and codification of the constitution. They've done plenty of devolution stuff, right? What they haven't done is the past stuff yet. They haven't sort of gone back and said, since 1997, the constitution has been changed sufficiently, which in a sense is similar to a future question, because even in like a question about the future, you're going to have to go back. But they haven't specifically asked about since 2010 or since 2015, the constitution has not been. So I would put my best bet on that box there, right? Constitutional reform so far has not gone far enough, and they will probably date it. And I suspect that date could be 2010, but it could be 2015. In fact, it can be 2015, I would suggest. Nora, I'm no longer looking at questions. So if anyone has got a very important question, just unmute yourself and tell me. Okay, so that's that. They also haven't quite asked any questions on this first box. Now, the first box is quite, difficult to ask questions on, I have to say, because they won't ask a question on the history. So you won't get a question on that. But you could possibly get a question about the rule of law and parliamentary sovereignty. I know that's a bit odd, but you could get a question on those 2 things. I think I've got a question coming up on it, but if I don't flag it, just underline or write down in your notes, and you should be taking notes at present. So parliamentary sovereignty and rule of law. Just make sure you know what they mean and how a question, like, evaluate the extent to which, evaluate the view that parliamentary sovereignty and the rule of law has been undermined in recent years. That's a good question. I think why am I confusing myself? Did I ask this question? Let me have a look. Sorry, I'm just trying to. No, I haven't. So the question is, evaluate the view that parliamentary sovereignty and the rule of law has been undermined in recent years. By the way, I don't think it's a certainty that a question like that will come up, but I think it's worth being aware of that question. I'm just having a look at my book because I'm fairly sure I did do something on this. And if I didn't, that's it's probably in the list of questions. No, I didn't. Okay, it's probably in the list of questions. So in my book, you've got a list of questions. So I'm going to say that one last time. Evaluate the view that parliamentary sovereignty and the rule of law has been undermined in recent years, right? I'm not saying that's a best, that's a, that is going to come up. All I'm saying is that's a possible question they can ask, right? But they've asked three devolution questions, and they have asked a question about the entrenched and codified, unentrenched and codified constitution. I'm going to skip the devolution one. Well, no. Okay, so there is a question here about devolution, but the only devolution question I think is possible if we've looked at the last three devolution questions, maybe this tough one may come up. Evaluate the view that the need for further English devolution is now overdue. Right, the further English devolution is now overdue. And I think that's a tough question, because of course, that requires you to just focus on. Oh, Saba says it is in my book. Fantastic. But just focus on English devolution. Oh, sorry, Nora, you've not been on stage.
I'm back now. No,
You're back.
it kicked me randomly back into the backstage room.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
But
So
also,
sorry.
I don't know if it won't let me post any comments at all. Even like I don't know if that's like an issue with my YouTube account or something
Because
else.
you're not a subscriber, maybe.
I am subscribed.
Is that really? What's happening? Why are you not able to?
I don't know. I'll try and figure it out.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, Nora is a student. Okay, Nora is a student.
Also, yeah. Sorry, no, I'm going to answer. Never mind. Carry on. I was about to answer.
No, you're welcome to answer. Go on.
No, someone just asked what other A levels I did. I do sociology and fashion. Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, that's it. It's all about Nora today. How can we structure this question? Okay. Yeah. Evaluate the view that. So let me give you a few ideas about this. Again, I can't go through these questions in great depth at this stage, right? I would probably structure it like this. I would talk about the power of the metro mayors, and those powers are too little, right? So the metro mayors are the 8 mayors across the country, including Andy Burnham and Andy Street, although he's no longer the mayor, and those sorts of mayors. I would talk about the West Lothian question and the discontent that creates. So you may remember the West Lothian question. And I would then talk about whether there is a need for an English parliament. Now, guys, I can't go through this in great depth. There's a really massive plan I've done here. But yeah, I would probably do something like that, right? Let's move on to the second question. Evaluate the view that the UK Constitution is in urgent need of reform. So there was a question about change. UK Constitution is in need of change. So that's similar to it, I suppose. But, it's possible, again, for them to ask it, because it was a few years back. Evaluate the view that the UK Constitution is in urgent need of further reform. So how does the Constitution need reform? Well, again, what I say here is I say Parliament needs to be reformed. I say the Constitution needs to be codified, and we need more devolution. These are the 3 points that I would put into a question like that. And again, I can't go through this in any great depth. Here's a question that I think is very likely to come up, possibly, right? The question would be, evaluate the view that since 2010, constitutional reform has not gone far enough. So since 2010, constitutional reform has not gone far enough. And I think that's really important. I've tackled a number of points, as you can see here. I've tackled parliamentary reforms, devolution, and rights. So here I've spoken about the rights and how civil rights or constitutional rights are damaged as a result of or safeguarded since the changes that are made since 2010. So I probably would do that. But as I said, I think that's a very realistic question in this essay, very realistic question in this exam, sorry, that constitutional reform has not gone far enough, because we haven't had that yet. We haven't had let's look back and ask ourselves a question, have these reforms been pretty productive? I think this is a very possible question. Evaluate the view that constitutional reform since 2015 have not gone or have not gone far enough, right? Reforms have not gone far enough. I think that this question is particularly relevant and particularly possible because we're now almost 9 years after, the end of the Cameron era, or we are 9 years after the end of the Cameron era, and that it's sort of, no, it's not 9 years. What I'm gonna say, it's 8 years, isn't it? Because Cameron actually resigned in 2015, but 9 years after the 2015 election. So it's a very valid question to ask. So don't get caught out, because some of you may just revise the 2015 or 2010 question. I would say think about the 2015 question, and I've suggested that you can probably still go with parliamentary reforms. You could probably even go with devolution, because there have been some changes to devolution since 2015. I will talk about Brexit as one of my paragraphs, and that's what I did here, because I feel that Brexit is certainly a constitutional reform, quite a big, substantial constitutional reform, and so it is important, I feel, that you cover Brexit as a potential, and that's quite current, I would suggest. Yeah, that's quite a current thing to cover, right? Low, you need to, I'm not saying low, but low, you need to wait, because we are going to get to EU a bit later on, but the EU isn't part of this section. Fantastic. Right. Okay. So we've done that already. That's come up last year. So this was actually a slide I did last year. I'm just leaving it on here because I'm pretty impressed with myself that we got it almost word for word. And I said to students, this has got to come up. It hasn't come up yet. And we went for it in great detail in our revision day. And so the students came out laughing. As I said, I think that's probably more likely. I think that's probably a little bit more likely. Followed by, so just so that, for those of you who didn't write it down, evaluate the view, not followed by, I don't think it's very likely, but evaluate the view that parliamentary sovereignty, and I've spelled parliamentary and I've spelled sovereignty wrong. What is going on today? Parliamentary sovereignty and the rule of law has been undermined in recent years. Right, I think that's a good question. Actually, I will be tackling this on Monday. I think I need to just give some thought to this. But I think I will be tackling this. I've got nearly every word in that question wrong. But yeah, I think I'm going to plan this one, actually. Okay. So we got that. And that's it for Constitution. I think we've got a fairly good set of questions for Constitution. Yeah. Let's move on to Parliament, where all the action is at the moment, because, of course, Parliament has been prorogued, meaning it has been, in effect, shut down. And they're going to, on Thursday next week, Rishi Sunak will go to the King, and there would effectively Parliament will be closed, and the election kicks off, right? Or at least the short campaign, they call it, kicks off.
Sorry, interrupt. A lot of people are asking about is an electoral reform a constitutional change?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it is. But of course, I think it is. In the same way that parliamentary reform is, even though it doesn't sit within constitution as a topic, it certainly is a constitutional reform. I would say if you are going to talk about electoral reform, then you've got to sort of maybe use a couple of lines to make a case for why it's a constitutional reform. And the way you do that is you can probably just say it's a constitutional reform because it fundamentally changes the way by which the democracy functions, way by which democracy functions. And that's constitutional, right? The way by which democracy functions is pretty constitutional. So yes, I would say that. Yeah, I would say that, Nora. Yeah. Great. Let's move on to Parliament and some of the past questions in Parliament. So last year, I'm going to start from last year. Last year, we had a question about when it comes to fulfilling their respective functions. So it was a question about functions. The Lords can be seen as more successful than the Commons. So actually, I did plan a functions question last year, but what I said to students is either you get a House of Lords functions question, or you get a House of Commons functions question. So we did two sets of functions questions. Evaluate the view that the Commons functions correctly or doesn't function very well for Lords. But actually, what they did is combined it. So it's very possible, by the way, that they may still carry on with a functions question, but just focus on Lords or just focus on Commons. I mean, the Commons is probably more likely than the Lords because there's more to say, and I think you probably know more about the Lords. But that's possible. So even though functions has come up, it's possible that you may get a functions question to do with one of these chambers rather than both together. Before that, evaluate the view that Parliament is largely ineffective in shaping government legislation. Right, so Parliament doesn't work effectively, and so it is a similar question actually, but it's focused on legislation. So you couldn't there talk about scrutiny, right? And you couldn't talk about accounting necessarily. Well, maybe. No, actually, I'm wrong. You can talk about the functions of select committees when it comes to legislation. But anyway, that's something to consider. Using the source, evaluate the view that the roles and membership of the House of Lords require reform. So the House of Lords requires reform. But what they did is specified roles and membership, which I think is still broad enough to be able to say that the House of Lords needs reform or doesn't need reform. There was a backbench question here. The principal role of backbench MPs is now to hold the government to account. Right, don't get fooled by this question because it is basically how effective are the backbenchers, but you would always have to bring it back to they're not that effective because they can't hold the government to account, right? And then there's a question here, which is a stinker of a question. Evaluate the view that although the House of Lords has less power than the House of Commons, in practice it exerts more influence on government decisions. It's such a tongue twister because all they're saying is that the House of Commons is more influential than the House of Lords. Yeah. Or sorry, the House of Lords is more influential than the House of Commons. Discuss. That's really what they're saying. So sometimes cut beyond the fluff of the question. It's a simple question, really. It's just saying that one is more influential than the other. Great. Any questions so far from our esteemed custom base?
No, but a lot of people are just saying that how lucky the year 12s now are going to be to write about the new election. That's kind of the discourse in the comments.
Yeah, that's good. I like the word discourse as well. Yeah, that's good. So we've already had a backbenchers question, as I said, and it came up. When did it come up? Sorry, what have I done? We've got that and Parliament. We've got so we had a backbenchers question in 2020. So it's possible they can re-ask a backbenchers question. So I think it's worth revising. Evaluate the view that backbenchers have little impact on Parliament. It's a great question, and once you've got the formula, you can answer this question. And I've said the way to do it is by select committees, influence over legislation, and at PMQs and what I call backbench groupings. But even if you wanted to just focus on PMQs, you're welcome to just do that. And if you didn't know about the backbench groupings, like the ERG, the European Research Group, for example, or the One Nation backbench group, or something like that. So you could talk about that, right? I think this is a very possible question. Evaluate the view that select committees are an effective means of scrutiny in Parliament. So it's a very specific question about select committees. It's not asking you to talk about backbenchers or opposition. They can do that. They can say select committees and backbenchers are an effective means of scrutiny, which broadens it out, or even select committees and opposition, which broadens it out. But here they're specifying select committees on their own. So I would revise 3 paragraphs on select committees. Now, the mistake many students make is they automatically go to common select committees. But of course, you have to talk about Lords because it talks about Parliament here. So you can't just focus on Commons. I would say have 2 paragraphs on the Commons and have 1 paragraph on the Lords select committees. So if between now and the exam and you don't join me on Monday, if you want to research Lords select committees, just Google it And I would say find out 3 successes and 3 failures of Lord Select committees, so that you can answer a question on Lord Select committees well, and like the positives and the negatives of Lord Select committees, right? I suspect most of you know enough about Common Select committees to be able to do that. Yeah. How are you doing, Nora? I'm stopping and pausing. All
Yeah,
good?
good. Oh, people are asking questions about feminism, but sadly.
Sadly, I don't teach feminism, although I do have. So a couple of years ago, I did do a feminist because people kept on asking me. So I have got on my website a it's a thing you got to buy, I'm afraid. It's not very expensive. I think it's like a tenner. But I did free webinars on feminism, so you can go back to that if you want to. But no, I don't teach. I only teach multiculturalism. So, and there is a
I
multiculturalism thing. Yeah.
sorry to
Go on.
I do anarchism, so if anyone else does anarchism, and I can post my essays on the website for anarchism, but
Superb.
not feminism, sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much. Uh, like I did have at this time last year, by the way, and I don't know, some people find this risky, but I did find this time last year there were students who knew nothing about anarchism, or yet they were taught it, or their teacher told them, and it's a naughty thing to do, just read the textbook, and I'm not going to teach you this subject, or nationalism or feminism. And so, what I say to students who know nothing about a subject, like at zero, I would say cut your losses and just and get my download it for a tenner. Get my free lessons on multiculturalism, because I last year a group of students did that. They literally skipped the one their teacher taught them, because you don't get a specific paper just on your one non-core idea. All of the questions come up. So I told them to because they knew nothing about nationalism. So I said just go through those free webinars and take the notes, and they did really well. Yeah, so believe it or not, so it's an hour and a half. So it's what it's 4.5 hours, or 4 or 5 hours maybe of specific content, but that was enough to learn it. But I don't have anything on nationalism, I'm afraid. And here we go, someone's cooked already, so that's great to hear. Yeah. Okay. Evaluate the view that the opposition is effective in the House of Commons. I feel that's a really possible question, because we've had an opposition really for the last 14 years, a singular opposition. But of course, the trick of this is not just to focus on the Labour Party, who are the opposition. And at the time of writing your exam, they will still be the opposition. Um, it's also to talk about the SNP and the Liberal Democrats. So possibly you could have the opposition being 2 paragraphs on Labour, but then talk about the other opposition parties. And there you can talk about the SNP, who are probably more effective, Liberal Democrats, who, bless them, they try their best, but they're not particularly effective usually. They've only got 15 MPs. So yeah, probably that's an important question, I would suggest. Evaluate the view about the okay, right. Tough question, but it can come up. And last year we did have, or a couple of years ago, we did have a question about the legislative process, right? Sorry, I'm just going to remind myself when that question was. Yeah, so we did have, it was whenever it was, shaping legislation. Using the evaluative of Parliament is largely ineffective in shaping legislation. Well, I do believe that you can get a question. Evaluate the view that executive dominance ensures Parliament has little meaningful control over the legislative process. So, in other words, Parliament has little control over making laws, right? Um, I mean, that's a crossover question, because it is, it crosses to the executive and Parliament, but it's a possible question, I would say. And it's not just the executive dominance leads to Parliament being ineffective, which is a broader question, because there you can talk about all sorts of ways by which the executive dominate Parliament. Here it's specifically about the legislative process. And I feel you do need to know about that. So please do be aware of that. Okay, because it's a tough question, let me just give you commons and the legislative process, the lords and the legislative process, and the roles of committees and legislation. Right, so I think those two first sections, because again, it's Parliament, it's not Commons. So you should talk about the Lords and how strong or weak the government is in the Lords. You should talk about the Commons and how strong or weak the government is in the Commons. And you should talk about the committees and whether governments dominate those committees or not. Yeah. And again, I'm not really talking about content today, guys. So apart from flagging these quick plans, but I may do a little bit of content. Well, I'm going to do a lot of content on Monday, but I may do a little bit of content on our next, like a few days before the exam, probably. Yeah, so you could evaluate the view that the House of Commons is in urgent need of reform. There has been actually a Commons and Lords, reform type question, but I think you could get a specific question on the House of Commons is in urgent need of reform, which is a difficult question because we tend to, as teachers, set questions on the House of Lords a lot. We don't really set questions on reform to the House of Commons. So I would suggest you've got to revise a Commons reform question. And yeah, that's it. That's it for the Parliament section. Any questions from anyone? Nora, how are we doing?
A lot of people are confused about the synoptic links, I think. So maybe if you could quickly explain that just a little bit.
Yeah, synopticity is pretty simple. You don't have to do any synopticity in a source question. So don't worry about synoptic links in a source question. And synopticity in a non-source question is where you link, and you don't do synopticity in the non-core ideologies. So in a non-source question, you just have to make a link in about one essay. In other words, you have to make a link with paper one in some form. So that's either, you make a link with elections or parties or voting behavior or democracy or conservatism, liberalism, and socialism. I would say do one a paragraph. And to be honest, most students make a link anyway. It's almost implicit in everything you write because you're going to talk about policies. You may talk about first past the post. You may talk about even conservatism and liberalism when you talk about constitutions, right? So I feel that it's not that difficult to make those links. And I haven't really come across examiners who say to me that, synopticity in paper 2 was pretty bad this time round. And they don't really talk about it in their examiners' reports either. So I suspect it's not a big deal because we do that implicitly. I suspect it's not a big deal. Yeah. Is that clear, Nora?
Yeah, I think that's a lot better. I think people were just confused on kind of how to put it in.
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. Try to get almost like inbuilt lines. You could say the constitution in Britain is uncodified because it conforms or it follows a conservatism, right? Because conservatism is about and which is a gradual and a slow change rather than a radical change, right? Or a codified constitution is similar to the principles of liberalism. So that's linking to ideologies. Or you can say because of first past the post, governments have a huge majority and so they can dominate parliament, right? You can say something like representation in the House of Commons is pretty poor. And that may be down to the fact that the types of people who vote tend not to represent students and ethnic minorities. And so voting behavior reflects the types of representatives we get. So all you're doing is you're making explicit links back to paper 1. And and as I said, I think you can do that very easily, and we do that anyway implicitly. Yeah. Okay, so PM and executive. Evaluate the view that power lies mainly with the prime minister rather than cabinet. That was last year. So it's basically, it's a question about prime ministers. Cabinets are useless. That's basically the question. Cabinets don't really matter. We did actually do a cabinet question last year, so it was a brilliant question to answer. Evaluate the view that the concepts of individual ministerial responsibility and collective ministerial responsibility are both still important. And I like to say that I flag this up as well to students in that year. And so, the students who went into that exam knew how to answer that question. Evaluate the view that since 2010, the executive has dominated Parliament. So it's about executive power in Parliament. Evaluate the view that since 2010, the UK has returned to cabinet government. So they like using dates. Cabinet government has returned. So you wouldn't be able to talk about Blair, and you wouldn't be able to talk about, no, sorry, let me rephrase that. You will be able to talk about Blair, but only in comparison to the current. So you could say Cameron, unlike Blair, did X, and that's a good form of analysis, by the way. Using the source, evaluate the view that the prime ministers have too much power. That prime ministers have too much power, right? So it's about the power of the prime minister. So it's a full range of questions they've asked so far. They haven't asked the question, and it is similar to that power question, but it can come up. They haven't asked the classic presidentialism question yet, right? Evaluate the view that the prime minister has become a president in all but name. I mean, that's a perfect question to answer. Presidentialism. So I would hesitate to guess that you would. That's sort of top of my list as a question that you need to revise. And I've got a really long, probably too long, but a longer thing to that.
I love the question so much.
It's a good question, isn't it?
It's such a good question.
Yeah, it's such a lovely, and it's sort of question that you can almost like revise and by rote answer.
Yeah.
I think component 2 is nicer than component 1.
Oh, I don't know about that.
Oh, okay. I quite like teaching it anyway. I think teaching wise, I quite like it. Because there's so much, it's much more meatier.
Yeah.
Evaluate the view that ministers are irrelevant. Now, we haven't had a minister's question. We have had a cabinet question, and cabinets are ministers, right? But ministers are beyond cabinet. Now, it would still allow you to talk about cabinet ministers, but then you all have to talk about the more irrelevant ministers like junior ministers. So I think that's probably quite important. As I said, that cabinet question was asked so last year, and we did revise it. And again, that was a question I planned here about evaluate the view that cabinet government remains central to the workings of the executive. So cabinet government is at the center of how the government works, right? So it's specifically about cabinet government. So yeah, now this is a question they haven't asked. So there is this block of questions about how ministers deal with events. And I try to think about questions they could ask on this, because there is a section in your specification about the success and failures of ministers when it comes to events. Evaluate the view that prime ministers have little control over events. I think that's a viable question. So they can't really deal with events, because events come like COVID, like Brexit, like war, and it comes to them and they don't really control it, like economic recession. They can't really deal with it because it's happened upon them rather than it's something that they've done out of their own volition. Evaluate the view that most prime ministers are victims of events. Was David Cameron a victim of the economic crisis, and that's why he did austerity? Was Theresa May a victim of Brexit, which she had nothing to do with, really? Was Liz Truss a victim of herself? Okay, so she was a victim of herself. But was there an event? There probably wasn't an event that, you could probably say, the Queen died during Liz Truss's era, but that wasn't really an event that derailed government. So probably she's an exception. Was Rishi Sunak a victim of, was Boris Johnson a victim of COVID? He wanted to do so much and he did very little, right? Was Rishi Sunak a victim of some form of economic crisis? So the question is basically saying, are events the thing that determines how a prime minister acts, or are there other factors? And the way I answer it, by the way, is to say that there are some prime ministers that are victims of events, but there are other prime ministers that can use events to their advantage. I think that's a really nice way of doing it. So events are always going to happen, but sometimes you can use events to your advantage. I'll give you an example of that. Rishi Sunak, so there's a war in the Middle East, there's a war in Palestine at the moment. And yesterday, the ICC, for those who do global politics, has basically said, and the ICJ, yesterday, the ICJ, and the day before, the ICC has basically said that Israel has gone way beyond anything that was proportionate, and it is now being, it's Netanyahu has been indicted for war crimes. So it's pretty serious stuff, right? And I know actually a lawyer who is working on these cases, and he's pretty confident that it's pretty dire now for Israel. Now the question is, this happens. Rishi Sunak uses it as a way of stoking fear. So he gives this speech outside Downing Street talking about extremism. This is a couple of weeks ago, a month or two ago, right? And so I suppose sometimes an event happens and then you can use it for your advantage. And it's cynical. He talks about extremism because, of course, he thinks he can win an election on fear. And I think this election for the Conservatives is going to be an election about fear. It's going to be the unknown. And that's what they want to do, right? So, it's pretty horrible stuff, right? Yeah, I mean, again, we had a question of it. Was the executive... Well, no, we haven't. The executive fulfills its functions poorly. So that's a very general question about how the executive works and does it work effectively. So there you can talk about prime minister, cabinet ministers, and also general ministers, and even broadly the executive and how it functions with civil servants and SPADs. So I think that's probably a good question to answer. But again, you've got to revise this question. Guys, I think I'm flagging questions that a lot of you may not know how to answer. Is that a fair assumption I'm making? Because I'm going beyond the obvious questions here, because they have asked the obvious questions now. And I'm trying to sort of go through the spec and work out what else can they answer? What else can they ask, rather? Right, that's it for executive. We're on our last section and we're on track to finish this within an hour. So any questions from any of you about what we have so far? Any questions?
I remember someone asking just kind of what general points would you use in a House of Commons reform essay, just outline headings, I guess.
Yeah, I would talk about, say, the select committee reforms. I would talk about reforms to the way the House of Commons functions. So things like the role of a speaker and whether the speaker has enough powers. So the right reforms suggested a number of reforms which the government didn't implement. I would probably say, I'm forgetting now. I'm gonna go back to my question. My plan. Where is it? Sorry, it's here, isn't it? Yeah, here we go. So yeah, I would do it. Commons and the legislative process, commons and scrutiny, and here we go, representation. So I would do commons and passing laws, commons and select committees, effectively, and PMQs, and then representation. Like, does it represent? So should there be a reform to the way by which representation works in the UK? Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the last section very quickly. Relations between the branches. So what have we had so far? Evaluate the view that power lies mainly with the Prime Minister rather than... I made a mistake here. That's not the last year's question. Sorry, I'm just going to look at the last year's paper. What have I done here? That's obviously not the question. Give me a second. Yeah, okay. No, it is. Actually, it is. Power lies most... No, it's... Last year, funnily enough, they didn't have an explicit question on relations. I'm just going to double check. So last year I had a question on codification. I had a question on power lies mainly with the Prime Minister over then Cabinet. So that's obviously not. And they had a question about the functions of the House of Commons. And then had another one. Select committees are the most effective way that a House of Commons holds the executive to account. Yes, sorry, they did have a select committee question last year. And that's my failing to not mention that. So they had two Commons questions last year in effect. Here we go. So the other question they had is this question here. Evaluate the view that select committees are the most effective way for the House of Commons to hold the executive to account. So actually, what I said about a select committee specific question, they sort of asked that already, but I planned that. So, you couldn't get a select, but there was a select committee question here. And again, the students were laughing about that question. So my apologies. So actually, yes, they didn't have a specific question on relations between the branches last year. They effectively had 2 questions on Parliament, and these were non-source questions. So you didn't have it. You basically had to answer a Parliament question in a non-source answer, and that's one of the ways by which they prevent students from missing out a particular topic, because you could end up getting in one of your choices just 2 questions on one topic. Yeah. Okay, so before then we had a question on evaluate the view that the Supreme Court operates with sufficient judicial independence and neutrality. We've had a question on evaluate the view that the Supreme Court has strengthened parliamentary sovereignty. We've had a question here, so Supreme Court again here, and Supreme Court against it. We've had another question on Supreme Court has too much influence over the executive. And then we've had a question here about the view that EU undermine parliamentary membership, the EU undermine parliamentary sovereignty, which I've spelled wrong. Right. So we've had 3 questions so far on Supreme Court. We didn't have a Supreme Court question last year, so it can come up again. I don't know if it will come up again. I mean, it can come up again, but it would, will it come up again? I don't know. So I would say that this question here is due to come up. It's a tough question. Evaluate the view that leaving the EU has decisively returned sovereignty to the UK Parliament. Now, the new guidelines from the Edexcel exam board say that they can't ask you anymore a question about when Britain was in the EU. So you can't get sort of a historic question about how the EU functions and when Britain was in the EU. So I think the only real question you can get is about, Britain outside of the EU, or when it left the EU, has sovereignty returned back to Parliament? You've got to revise that, right? So I think put your minds, get your best minds to revise that question, because I think it's a very valid question to answer. I spent a good long time over that question with my students this year. Yeah. This hasn't been asked yet, and again, it's a very realistic question. Evaluate the view that the location of sovereignty has moved in recent years. So sovereignty has moved away from Westminster, because that's where the location is, and has moved to the devolved assemblies, for example. So you have to have an answer to the sovereignty question. I mean, those 2 questions are very big on my list. Yeah, I mean, you can get a Supreme Court, evaluate the view that the UK Supreme Court is effective at checking the power of government. So it's not dissimilar to previous questions, but, it's more the UK Supreme Court versus the government. So, it's always worth revising Supreme Court, because they do like Supreme Court questions, of course. So that's probably my best bet if you get a Supreme Court question. Effectiveness in checking the power of government. Yeah, that's where we are. So that's my predictions for the 4 topics. I can't do non-core because there are too many non-core, and of course, it's up to you to work through your specific one. I do multiculturalism, but yeah, we've got 5 minutes. Any questions? I don't do US, but yeah, you're asking that. Yeah, I do global. Yeah, I do global. Yeah, sure. Good. So Zoe's asking, can you do a question about sovereignty moving to the people? And I feel you can. You can do that. So certainly you can do that. Yeah. I'm not going to make a group chat because it just gets too complicated. I'm afraid I can't do that. I can't submit myself to a group chat. Do you recommend reading textbooks? No, at all. Not at all. You've got to go through my how to revise YouTube video. Don't read a textbook. Only read the textbook when you're doing when you're when you're writing essays. Nora's just said that, right? No textbook reading. Textbook is like a comfort blanket for
No
everyone.
textbook reading.
Yeah, yeah. Don't do that. Just read only read the bit of the textbook to answer a question, right? I think that's the way to do it.
The textbooks, they just overload information that is often just not concise, I
Yeah,
think, personally.
yeah, yeah. Absolutely, absolutely.
Do you have any US essays? No, do you have any US essays? No.
No, I'm afraid not. I think there may be one or two 12 markers I once put up on my website, but maybe, just maybe. I don't think there are actually. I think I was going to do it, and then I thought I'm
There
not going to
are,
do that.
I don't do US, but there are a lot of US, like politics help on TikTok. I've seen like a lot of them come up on my For You page. So
Yeah,
maybe look on TikTok, honestly. And I know a lot of people they kind of sell their resources. So maybe have a look at that.
yeah. There's that question here. I feel like we might get PM in cabinet again. Look, it's not impossible, but it came up last year, right? So really, is that going to come up in that form at least? I don't know. I don't know, right? Obviously, make sure you cover it. But I don't, it's come up last year and they don't repeat questions so specifically like that. So I don't think it will come up. Yeah. There's a question about sources. Can I suggest that just watch my video on YouTube on sources and that will answer your question. It's on the front page of my website as well. So you can just click on it and it'll answer your source, how to answer a source question. I want a burrito. Anyone got a good recipe? Mint rose, I would suggest. Mint rose is a good recipe. Tips for poorly worded sources: avoid them and go on to the source that is probably a bit better. Yep.
People ask me if I have any predictions for anarchism. I don't. I'm really sorry. I'll put my essays for the core topics, the four core. I'll put them on the website, but no, I'm really sorry. I don't have any. But yeah, I will put. I know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll put them on the website.
Go. Yeah. Paper one was good. So this person, Paradox, thinks that paper one was good. Yeah. I hope
I love how
I
I'm just
helped you. Sorry?
I love how I'm just getting atted in the
You're
comments.
getting at it. You are. You are. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I'm just running. I think we're done, right? We're done. Conservatives for the win in July. Yeah, you reckon? That's never going to happen. Yeah, I'm just running through some of these questions. Yeah. Yeah, okay. How would you structure a PM's having little control over events? So I would probably do, where is it? It's back here. Yeah, I would probably do this. Do it by areas: economic events, foreign policy, and domestic disasters. I would probably do it by that. Yeah, so these are the three events. And then those prime ministers that command these events, those prime ministers that fail when it comes to these events. That's probably how I would do it. Yeah. Okay, I think we're nearing an end there. So if you do want to join me on Monday, you're welcome to do so. If you've joined me already for series 3 and 4, then you don't have to join these webinars because we'll probably go through the same or similar essays, bar that one that I flagged up today that I think probably I need to give a clearer answer to. But yes, and so yeah, that's it. This is I will do a global prediction sometime, maybe later in half term. So look out for that. But yeah, I think we're done. So good luck to you all. I hope you do well. And Taylor was asking about the global. I don't know yet. I will let you know. Monday is at 10 o'clock. Starts at 10. We finish. We'll have lots of breaks, but we'll finish at around 3:30. 3:30. Yeah. Yeah, on Monday I'm going to go through these plans in great detail. Exactly. I can't do it today because that would take literally the whole day. That's why I'm spending the whole day. So that's good. Zoho's famous now. That's great. Are you famous because you were put on? Oh, because you're on the screen. Here we go. You're even more famous now because you're on the screen. Fantastic. Famous for 5 minutes. Okay, wonderful. I think we did well there. We got through it in an hour, and that's what I plan to do. I need to eat my lunch and enjoy the day. And I wish you all good luck and focus on these questions, and I think you won't go wrong. Yeah, I think look, focus on the questions I've suggested, and even if there's an odd question which haven't answered, you've still got a view through the exam. Like you've still got a way through this exam, and this is going to remain on YouTube as well. So good luck to you guys, and yeah, Nergis, it will be on Zoom. Yeah, scan the QR code, guys. Thank you very much. Luna Lucy. That's a good way of saying it. Luna Lucy. Fantastic. Excellent. See you later, guys. Thank you, guys. Thank you for Paradox. Thank you for plugging the book. That's great. I need to pay the rent. Big up Corbin. Fantastic. Yes. Excellent. See you guys. See ya. Bye.